Something you'd like to ask me, Mr. Strobel?
You like movies about gladiators?
But we are atheists. Atheists don't believe in God.
Well, what do they believe?
I believe diversity is an old wooden ship that was used during the Civil War era.
Is it possible that Jesus survives being spiked to the cross?
60% of the time, it works every time.
That's not funny.
Not meant to be.
Hey everyone, it's Apologetics Movie Night. Welcome to Paulogia, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians. If you're new to the channel, please take a second to tap on the subscribe button so that you'll be notified when new science, theology, and news videos come out. It seems to be a common theme in these quarantine times that some of us find ourselves watching entertainment content that we perhaps otherwise wouldn't give the time of day. And so it was that I found myself watching Case for Christ the movie from PureFlix, the dramatization of the spiritual journey of investigative reporter Lee Strobel in 1980 that eventually led him to become a Christian and write his best-selling book, The Case for Christ. Now, much ink has been spilled about the quality of the filmmaking and the excessive liberties that the movie takes in portraying events drastically differently than how they occurred in real life, and pondering exactly how skeptical real-life Lee Strobel may have been in the first place. Might I recommend a recent episode of the New Testament Review podcast for a Christian perspective covering many of the problems with this book and film. Of note for this video is that the experts and scholars that he visits in the book and film are not the same sources he used during his initial conversion phase. It is somewhat ironic that a movie whose purpose is to demonstrate the historical accuracy of an event from 2,000 years ago cares so little about the historical accuracy of an event from 40 years ago. But that's not what I'm here for today. What I wanted to do was put myself into the world of the film and analyze and talk about the evidence as presented in the film to see what impact it should have had on movie Lee. Let's see what kind of case for Christ is made by the movie Case for Christ.
I'm not going to lose my wife and my kids to something that I can't even reason with. No. I can't even pretend to go along with this, right? I mean, you of all people should understand that.
I do.
This handsome mustachioed gentleman is Movie Lee Strobel. Movie Lee is a hotshot reporter at the Chicago Tribune, and no one seems to like him very much, presumably because he doesn't have Jesus in his heart. After his wife becomes a Christian, he sets off on a quest to prove Christianity wrong. The first person Movie Lee goes to is movie Gary Habermas. If you're familiar with this channel, you might remember real-world Gary Habermas from recent videos on the resurrection.
Right, so where are the facts, Dr. Habermas? The resurrection narrative is more legend than it is history.
Really? Well, not according to historical records.
Well, that depends entirely on your definition of historical records, doesn't it? If you mean the Bible, then that's exactly what I believe the Gospels to be. Someone writing down what decades of growing legendary oral tradition have come to be.
Did you know that we have a report of the resurrection with specific eyewitnesses? It dates all the way back within months of the resurrection itself.
Movie Gary is referring to a portion of the start of 1 Corinthians 15. Here, Movie Gary is being true to real-life Gary, in that when having a casual conversation about this passage, he'll characterize it as months, but in his scholarly written work, where he'll be fact-checked, he stays that claim at years. Now, frankly, it doesn't matter to me if this creed began circulating a week after Jesus died. That doesn't tell us anything about whether it accurately represents true events.
That source also adds that 500 separate people saw Jesus at the same time.
Oh, do we have reports from 500 separate people that they saw Jesus? No. Do we have reports of even one person who says they were part of 500 people who saw Jesus? No. Do we have someone quoting a meme from 20 years earlier, which claims that 500 people saw Jesus? Yes. That's all we have. If Movie Lee thought these accounts were legends just 10 seconds ago, I don't know why Movie Gary merely repeating the legendary claim in a hallway would change his mind. It shouldn't.
Okay, so 500 witnesses, but that's still just one historical source, the Bible.
Wrong. There are at least 9 ancient sources, both inside and outside the Bible, confirming that disciples and others encountered Jesus after the crucifixion.
Oh, what are these 9 sources from both inside and outside the Bible? Let's let real-life Lee rattle them off for us.
You have the Creed, you have Paul, we have Peter in Acts. Number 4, 5, 6, and 7 are the Gospels.
So 7 of those are in the Bible.
And then we have, at a minimum, Polycarp and Clement from sources outside the Bible.
2 are not. And the 2 that are not, Clement and Polycarp, do not mention appearances of resurrected Jesus in any way. At best, they affirm that early Christians believed that Jesus had been resurrected, but we already knew that's what Christians believed. We're trying to find out if that belief is true.
But let's not kid ourselves here. People die for lies all the time.
900 people died drinking poison Kool-Aid at Jonestown.
True, and there are other examples like that throughout history, but here's the difference. People don't willingly drink poison for something that they know is a lie.
Fair point.
That would be a fair point if we knew that any of these so-called martyrs actually claimed to be eyewitnesses, and that their deaths were connected to their profession of seeing resurrected Jesus. I wish that Movie Lee would have asked for the names of these people, how we know what they believed, and how we know the circumstances of their death.
If the early church martyrs knew that the resurrection was a hoax, then why would they willingly die for it?
I've already done a number of videos on this, and recently appeared on the popular Unbelievable podcast to discuss whether martyr accounts lend evidence for the resurrection with Dr. Sean McDowell, a professor who did his PhD on these martyr accounts.
You can't move from the sincerity of the apostles to the truth of the resurrection. I've never said that. I make it very clear in my book. In fact, at the very opening pages, that the apostles' willingness to suffer and die doesn't prove the resurrection in particular or Christianity in general. All it does, that shows they sincerely believed they had seen the risen Jesus in the way Paul does and maybe Peter does.
Historical evidence points us to the Apostle Paul, who didn't see resurrected Jesus at least the first time around, and maybe Peter. Are these arguments why Movie Gary became a Christian?
I lost my wife Debbie to cancer.
I'm sorry about that.
It was the worst thing that will ever happen to me. But in my time of loss, it made me confront my beliefs. And that is where I found my true comfort.
No. But this never-happened chit-chat was enough to prompt Movie Lee to break into a dingy, dusty room at the paper and turn it into his war room, somehow sporting an ancient, abandoned whiteboard in 1980, when dry erase markers weren't even invented until 1975, and not popularized until way after in the 1990s.
But that's not important right now.
Movie Lee is going to write down that 500 people saw resurrected Jesus, something he thought was a legend this morning, until Movie Gary said it out loud, which is apparently all it takes for something to be true. Next up, archaeologist turned priest, Father Marquez.
Look, I understand that a number of people claim to have seen Jesus after his crucifixion, and some of them even wrote it down.
One person wrote it down. In only one place in the New Testament does an author identify themselves and say, I saw resurrected Jesus. Just Paul, not some of them.
I guess my question is, how can we be sure of the reliability of those manuscripts?
The same way we authenticate any historical document, by comparing and contrasting the copies that have been recovered. It's called textual criticism.
Movie Lee is being a little imprecise with language here. It seems like he's asking about how sure can we be that what the New Testament is saying reflects factual reality. But what the Father is going to answer is how certain can we be that the words in the Bible we have now matches the words in the original copies. Those are entirely different questions. A false statement could be perfectly preserved for long periods of time. That wouldn't somehow make it true.
The more copies we have, the better that we can cross-reference and figure out if what the original was saying is historically accurate. And the earlier they come from in history, the better.
Sometimes. But mistakes can crop up in early copies just as easily. And sometimes it's the later manuscripts that inform this. This is why the actual criteria is earliest and most reliable transcripts, not just early. But I digress. Listen, I love textual criticism as a discipline, and find it fascinating on its own merit, but I've never seen variations in the text as a compelling reason to discard the text. Personally, I don't think variations are a good argument against Christianity. On the flip side,
To date, archaeologists have recovered 5,843 Greek New Testament manuscripts. That's 4 times as many as the Iliad.
The sheer number of manuscripts is in no way an attestation of the truth of the claims in the document. If it were, we'd have to say we have great evidence for Harry Potter attending Hogwarts, or Frodo throwing a ring into Mount Doom. Even worse, the manuscript counts skew very, very heavily to late finds. Very few are early, and they don't even particularly attest to a continuity of accurate copying.
If you laid the surviving copies of Aristotle one on top of the other, it would make barely 4 feet. You do the same with surviving copies of the New Testament, the stack would be a mile high.
This couldn't have less to do with the truth claims of Christianity. Though if something might come in a close second in irrelevance.
And no one's ever proven if the shroud is the actual burial cloth of the Christ. But whenever someone looks in those eyes for the first time, the Galilean who hung on the cross 2 millennia ago suddenly becomes a real person.
Once again, the film is telling us that a lack of hard evidence isn't as important as how things make us feel. It's a strange theme in a movie ostensibly about someone who says it was evidence that convinced him. It's almost like it wasn't the evidence at all. But we're back to the war room to jot down this entirely irrelevant note about how many people made copies of the Bible. And then, in a Rocky training-style montage, Movie Lee is adding more to the board. A photo of the Yehohanan ankle bone, found with a nail in it. That's neat for some reason. Now the actual number of manuscript the priest said exists. That seems redundant with the first note, but whatever. I'm not the reporter here. Let's go around the board. Authenticate sources. I don't think you did that. 9 sources for resurrected Jesus. We covered that. It's the Bible plus 2 high priests who don't so much as mention appearances of Jesus. 2 generations, not enough for a legend to grow. Wow. I'd love to hear your source on that. Stories pop up and grow immediately. There was a large movement of Elvis's alive followers within weeks of his death. Describing something as moving at the speed of gossip is a phrase meant to convey something moving quickly, not moving slowly. Historical accounts prove that the tomb was empty. Wow! The only sources we have for an empty tomb are the Gospels. If Movie Lee is going to just accept the Gospels on the tomb, I don't know why he needs this board at all. Or this movie. He should just automatically believe in the resurrection. That's like totally accepting that a mama bear, a papa bear, and a baby bear live in a house and make porridge, but at the same time being skeptical that a girl named Goldilocks really came in and tried some. They're part of the same story. I can't quite make out the rest. Or this one. Why something something, gospel something, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. There's a photo of the P52 credit card-sized fragment of the Gospel of John from the 2nd century. That fragment doesn't talk about the resurrection, but it looks neat. In movie land, this fragment can be found randomly in a priest's office, not in a guarded museum. Well, now we're just putting up the same photo that was already on the board in the previous shot. Continuity editors were not a priority in this film.
Lee Strobel?
Speaking.
Yeah, this is Bill Craig.
I'm sorry, who?
Bill Craig.
Oh, cool. Movie William Lane Craig goes by Bill Craig.
Maybe the reason
That the tomb was empty was because Jesus' body was never there in the first place.
because we know that the Romans used to throw the bodies of crucifixion subjects to the dogs, right?
Now we're getting somewhere. This is what I think happened to Jesus. That he was thrown into a mass grave. The thing that most commonly happened to most Roman crucifixion victims?
Well, there's no evidence for that.
Wait. No evidence that the bodies of crucifixion victims were left to the elements and to the wildlife? Every historical reference to Roman crucifixion validates this. A Korea tombstone inscription, a letter from Roman author Horace, Roman satirist Juvenal, dream interpreter Artemidorus, and Satyricon of Petronius. All gruesome pictures of bodies left for long periods of time for scavengers. Disrespect of the crucified bodies was the normal, usual case. This is not in dispute. While I'm not sure if Movie Gary would admit it, Real life Gary knows that most crucifixion victims were thrown into mass graves.
But I would concede, and many would, that that's what happened to most people.
If Movie Bill means evidence that it happened to Jesus specifically, then no. But in absence of compelling evidence, hypothesizing that the most common thing that happened is the thing that happened is entirely reasonable.
But there are specific records that didn't happen to Jesus.
And what records are those?
Yes, please tell. What records are those?
Well, actually, the earliest recorded accounts tell us that Jesus was properly buried in a tomb.
No, Movie Bill. The earliest recorded account is 1 Corinthians 15, and all it says is that Jesus was buried. It does not say how. It does not say tomb. The Greek word used for burial in this passage is used in documents of the time for elaborate, rich tombs and lowly, unmarked ditch tossings and everything in between.
And the Romans did allow for burial of some crucifixion victims.
Yes, there are a few recorded exceptions allowing for proper burials, which means that the usual case, non-exceptions, were burials of the unmarked ditch kind. Thank you for affirming what the usual circumstances are. What this tells us is that it's within the realm of plausible that Jesus was put in a tomb. It does not tell us that it was likely or that it happened. If you haven't seen it, Real Life Bill did a series of podcasts about my position on the empty tomb. He's not a fan of me.
We know that, according to Jewish customs, women were deemed to be unreliable witnesses. Am I right?
Well, true. So why did all four gospel writers record that it was women who discovered the empty tomb?
I'm asking you that.
Well, if you were a first century Jew making up this story out of thin air, then you would never say that women discovered the tomb.
Well, few suppose that the author of Mark was making up stories out of thin air. He was drawing on 20 years of Jesus stories being passed around by word of mouth, with certain details already set in people's minds and expectations. Kind of like a round table made its way to most Arthur legends. It was part of the expectation. Women going to the tomb was feasibly one such detail. That said, if it weren't true, why would such a detail arise? Well, the fact of the matter is that in Jewish custom, women were usually the ones dealing with corpses. That was women's work, not men's work. To have men going to the tomb would have had no ring of truth to it. Just like it wouldn't have sounded right in the 1960s to have the nurses in your story be male. The story of Jesus wasn't being spread in the courts. It was being spread household to household, where women are massive influencers. There's much more we could say, but to pretend to know what was convincing, or what would have been embarrassing, about a particular story in a culture 2,000 years ago is shaky ground at best.
Sure, there are differences, but that doesn't trouble most historians.
Why? Why doesn't that trouble? It troubles me. It should trouble them.
It doesn't actually trouble me that much either, because I remember a time in my life when I could easily harmonize them all away, imagining my own alternate account in my head where all the details meshed. However, what I notice now is that all of these differing details tend to exaggerate the story more and more in each subsequent account. The legend grows, from a man in white to eventually full-on glowing angel teams. I'd encourage you to check this for yourself. In each case, the story is growing.
Do you really want to know the truth, or is your mind already made up, regardless of the facts?
I really want to know the truth, Movie Bill. My mind was already made up. I was a Christian. I set out to prove that Christianity was true. I was on the opposite mission of Movie Lee.
Oh, look, Doc.
I'm a journalist, okay? It's my job to challenge assumptions until they're proven otherwise. That's all I'm doing.
No, and I get that. But when is enough evidence enough evidence?
The point at which I am convinced of a thing is the point at which there is enough evidence for the thing. We don't get to choose what convinces us. It's not my fault if you've run out of evidence and I'm still not convinced. My question back is, why in the world is this enough evidence to convince you, Movie Bill?
Dr. Roberta Waters, president of the American Association of Psychoanalysts.
I'm told that there's an important difference between a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, with the latter perhaps falling out of favor in the non-Freudian crowd. That said, it won't matter for the trivial point that Faye Dunaway is in this film to make.
Hallucinations are like dreams. They happen in individual minds.
Where have I heard that recently?
Hallucinations are like dreams. They happen in individual minds.
Oh, thank you, Real Life Lee.
It's one thing to be mesmerized into making animal noises. It's quite another for 500 people to have the same dream. To be honest, that would be an even bigger miracle than the resurrection itself.
While mass hallucinations and mass hysteria very much are studied phenomena, none of that makes any difference if we can't show that the tale of 500 witnesses really happened. Our only source for the alleged 500, a single reference in a letter of Paul, who explicitly caveats that it's a second-hand hearsay story that he got from unnamed other people. That this report is simply inaccurate is the least miraculous option of all.
May I ask you something?
Sure.
It's about your father. I'm just curious what your relationship with him is like.
I have an excellent relationship with my father. Thanks for asking. Movie that is clearly focused entirely on proving things with evidence, not emotion.
So whether or not Jesus himself or someone else took him off of the cross early, or if he fakes his own death, it doesn't matter. It completely discounts every aspect of the resurrection.
Right, the swoon theory.
I get that Muslims believe that Jesus didn't die on the cross, because that's what the Quran says. So Christians will have to keep addressing this one in perpetuity. But I'm just not that interested. If Jesus lived, then Jesus died. I can grant that point all day long. Easiest thing.
Here's where the chili meets the cheese, my friend.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Back to the crime board. Let's see if Movie Lee learned anything off camera. Lots of illustrations of scenes from the Bible. I mean, there are lots of drawings of Superman in the world. I'm not so sure this is technically evidence. Oh, we couldn't read that one before. Early accounts of Christ were written centuries after. Yeah, that's definitely false. Get rid of that one.
The empty tomb is based on evidence.
No. The empty tomb is for the Bible tells me so. No outside sources. Is Movie Lee's movie family evidence of something? Can't just be an emotional appeal, can it? Hey, Movie Lee just took that card off. Continuity editor. Wait, Axe reliable? With 2 exclamation points? That was certainly never established in the movie. It's interesting that it's posted by the words Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian. The author of Acts is very open that he compiled his works from a variety of secondary sources, and many historians conclude that there is solid evidence that the works of Josephus would have been one of these sources, peppering in some historical details into the Acts account, lending it the facade of reliability in some areas, but that don't translate to the areas Movie Lee is investigating. Did you know that the movie Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter includes accurate words from the historical records of the Gettysburg Address?
And that government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Does that strengthen the case for you that Lincoln hunted vampires?
Still takes a leap of faith.
Evidence needs faith?
All right, God. You win.
God wins. He probably gets that a lot.
The evidence for your faith. It's more overwhelming than I could have ever imagined.
I don't know. I can imagine quite a bit.
You'll get it.
I better.
You will.
You're talking about the evidence presented in this movie, Movie Lee? Like the things you pinned to your crime board? That was overwhelming to you? The Bible says miracles happened. There are lots of copies of the Bible. If the miracles in the Bible really happened, then they were miracles. The end? That's your whole knowledge quest.
But it wasn't just the evidence, okay?
Oh no. Not you too, Movie Lee. Can't anyone in Movie Land become a Christian because of the evidence?
It was you.
Oh well. I guess it's like those women at the tomb. They wrote it this way because it wouldn't be believable otherwise.
We lose all credibility.
Too late for that, I think. But what do you think? Did Case for Christ the movie present a compelling case worthy of turning Movie Lee's life around? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you'd like to hear the more serious and more detailed cases put forth by the real-life counterparts of the characters in the film, tap on the Paulogia vs. Resurrection playlist on your screen now. See you there, and until next time, later.